Hey, Dan here with Wandering DMs, and I'm a huge Marvel fan. I just saw The Eternals last night, and I wanted to share my thoughts on why it was a hopelessly doomed project. That's right, it was doomed! Usually on the Wandering DMs channel, my partner Paul and I do role-playing game stuff, but I've been a Marvel zombie since way back in the day, so I have opinions. If I get to play Jeff Grubb's Marvel Superheroes role-playing game from the 80s, that's probably my favorite thing to do. I may assume a lot of Marvel knowledge here without going into it blow by blow, and also, warning, it's all spoilers. It's just all spoilers all the way through. I'm going to spoil everything, just to be clear. You know, there's a lot of movies that I watch that seem flawed, and afterwards I feel like I could have made suggestions that would have improved it, like some scenes to add or take out, or some dialogue that could have been massaged. And look, Monday morning quarterbacking is easy. I'm not going to claim that I'm about to write a superhero movie script that's going to be great. But most of the time, I feel like I can find improvements fairly easily. And Marvel's Eternals is an interesting, unique case that I kind of don't feel like that. I feel like the problems are really intrinsic to the story that they're trying to tell that doesn't fit into a movie format super well. And anything that I try to think of to improve one part of it, I realize that it's going to make some other part actually worse. So any thread that I tug at, it's like the whole thing is just kind of knit together like a Gordian knot. Now, the Eternals group is a creation by our founding father, Jack Kirby, about a team of immortal superheroes that are empowered by the giant robot space gods, the Celestials, to protect humanity. And he started that comic back in 1976. It's very much in line with his other work that mixes mythology and science fiction and cosmic space-faring themes that was obviously very dear to Kirby's heart. He started with Stan Lee at Marvel with the long-running Thor line. And full disclosure, Thor is actually my favorite superhero, and I've read and reread the Kirby Stan Lee series probably about 3 or 4 times at this point. It was actually Walt Simonson's work on Thor in the 80s that actually kind of sucked me into comics in the first place with the Thor comic and Marvel. And of course, when Kirby left Marvel, he went over to DC and he started the New Gods series. That was actually cut short. It was canceled before he got to tell his full story. Kirby came back to Marvel, and then he started the Eternals and the story of the Celestials. And they're very close. In fact, as far as the initial switch from Marvel to DC, you can actually look at particular issues of the original Thor comic where he actually sets up, he actually uses the phrase, and then here come the new gods at a particular point. So he actually sets up the group that he created over at DC, and the whole work is very much the thing that really started comics coming out of Jack Kirby's amazing imagination. Now, granted that both the DC New Gods title and the Marvel Eternals title got canceled before Kirby got to wrap up his storylines. Interestingly, the original Kirby storylines were wrapped up back in the Thor comic. I believe that was issue 300 or 301 or somewhere around there, where the Eternals finally confront their celestial masters using the Unimind power that they have, and it, ends a particular way. One of the things that's interesting about going into an MCU movie as someone who's read the comics for many, many years is, of course, we know that there's been lots of iterations and reboots and different takes on the characters and many, many different storylines and many costume changes and many relationship changes and things like that. And you're kind of wondering, even if you know all of them intimately well, you're going in wondering how the MCU producers are going to use that material and which thread they're going to focus on. Of course, they get to do their own unique twist and take on it. So you can have complete knowledge of the comics and still not know exactly what's going to go into an MCU movie. And that's one of the things that keeps me interested and excited when new movies do come out. So the 2021 Marvel The Eternals movie is directed by Chloe Zhao. It has a story by Ryan and Kaz Firpo, and it is over 2.5 hours long. It's pretty close to 2 hours, 40 minutes. It currently has an aggregated rating on Metacritic of about 50%, which is lower than a lot of Marvel movies. So the movie is long, right? I mean, at one point, a movie over 2 hours was rare. The movie is long, but at the same time, it feels rushed to me. The scenes are very choppy. They're very breathless plotting. They have so much that they are trying to get in that the scenes go plot, 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 and you kind of don't have time to catch your breath or really reflect on what's going on. For me, the scenes really don't tend to land emotionally. They don't breathe for me like I'm accustomed to, frankly, from a lot of Marvel movies, which is why I normally acclaim them. A couple of examples. There's a scene where Cersei says, "I've tried to reach the Celestial Arishem many times," and we never saw that. That actually is, when she says that, it's actually a surprise because we never had time to actually see her try that and become frustrated. So there's a lot of heavily plotted scenes where I feel like as a viewer, I'm trying to catch up and fill in things that must have happened a couple scenes ago that we didn't actually have time to see, even though the movie's so long. Different characters come into conflict and then they make up and they go back and forth very quickly without any real emotional resolution or me being convinced that it makes sense for them to come to a détente. The intriguing thing about the Eternals is I do think that there's a really interesting seed of an idea in the third act, but it takes a long time to get there, and even when you get there, it doesn't really feel like it's earned. So here it is. The interesting thing about the Eternals is that there's a reversal from the presentation of the standard good guy superhero team, and it turns out that they're secretly the bad guys. And that their mission on Earth has actually been to cultivate the people of the Earth to increase the population of sentient beings so as to nourish a new celestial named Tiamat that has been hatching deep inside the Earth like it's an egg. And so their mission is to birth that celestial, which will wind up causing the destruction of the Earth and all the life on it. Not every single one of the team knows it, but the key leaders do as the story starts. In addition to that, you have the character of Icarus, who is your standard leading white guy team leader Superman analog. And that's actually explicitly called out at one point. There is a character, there's a young boy that actually points to him and says, "Hey, that's Superman," at one point. Super strong, flies, basically indestructible, has heat vision, things like that. And he turns out to be the chief villain at the end. He has secretly killed the prior leader, Ajak, played by Selma Hayek, near the start of the story. And so you actually have two levels of reversal of who you thought the good guys were that actually turn out to be the villains of the story.
Giant evil gods.
I wish I could have seen it.
I know. That would have been a fun weekend.
Hey, that does sound like fun. Wonder where that idea came from. So problem number one is that there's too many characters. And this is actually a standard long-running comic book team problem of how big does the team get before you can't follow what's going on anymore, and it's too confusing for new viewers, and there isn't time for the different characters to have beats and have an interesting character arc all along. So this is something that people have been fighting over as far as comic book creators for decades at this point. So you have Selma Hayek in the movie, you have Angelina Jolie in the movie, and I mean, they're huge movie stars. As far as I'm concerned, they deserve and could easily carry a whole feature film on their own and get a full, deep character arc happening just for each of them independently. And here they are in a fairly large team. They get fairly limited screen time, and it feels like a little bit of a loss to me. It almost feels like there's 3 or 4 different movies all being sliced up and trying to be jammed together in the Eternals. So the obvious response would be, well, let's reduce the number of characters that are on screen for the Eternals at a time. But the problem is that the whole climax of the story is how this large extended family fractures and comes into conflict along a multitude of different axes. And so in the end, once the backstory has been revealed, A couple of the characters want to fight the Celestials and stop the destruction of Earth. A couple of the characters still want to follow their original mission and assist the Celestials in spreading more life in the universe. A couple of the characters say that they have one opinion but not the other, and they're not going to directly fight either side. So the multiple dimension fractures of the extended family, that ultimately is the story, and you can't do that with fewer characters. Problem number 2 is that the story feels very pedestrian for about the 2/3 of the running time. It feels like, okay, here's another superhero story, and we're going to get the origin story, and we're going to get flashbacks to what's happened before as the backstory sort of gets played out for us. And I've seen it before, and the superpowers are things that you've seen from other characters many times. I think there were people in the theater where I was that actually walked out before we got to the 3rd act. But the problem is that the whole point, again, of the story is the surprise twist that the apparently normal superhero team turns out to be really the bad guys ultimately. And you can't do that surprise unless you've kept it hidden for a while. So on the one hand, I would like to get past the standard superhero stuff, but that is what justifies the ending being a surprise twist. So I don't know what you could do about that. Problem number 3 is that the reveals seem basically unearned. Again, the whole thing's fairly rushed, and the scenes to me seem like here's a plot, here's a plot, here's a plot, here's a plot point, without really catching your breath. And so there's a point about halfway through when the Celestial Arishem basically just drops in at some point. Just like, here's time for the complete backstory drop. And Arishem communicates with our character Cersei, and just from beginning to end just tells the whole secret backstory that was being kept from her up until that point. And it's really unclear why he would do that at that point. Ultimately, classic superhero, supervillain problem, the telling the master plan winds up foiling that plan. And at that point, there's no clear reason why he could have just like kept it secret, because the emergence of the new Celestial was clearly happening already. And I don't really see what the Eternals were doing to assist that at that point. So he could have just kept his lip buttoned and not said anything. But here's a point where all the backstory comes out, and it doesn't seem like it was really earned by our characters. So you could think about making some kind of quest or challenge or discovery to get that information, but then the movie just gets longer. And one of the main problems is the movie's already too long, frankly. So obviously they didn't have time to flesh that out anymore, and this is what the result is. Problem number 4 is that the movie is not self-contained. And this is a critique that I would make a lot about the Marvel properties these days, including the first couple of series that were on Disney Plus. The story doesn't really get its own satisfying closure altogether. There are, like a lot of these series now, there are several side references to the blip. Okay, we've got that many times at this point. References to the Avengers being in the world, stuff like that. And I've kind of frankly lost my patience for that at this point. But on the other hand, at the key moment when the leader of the Eternals, Ajak, reveals that she herself, again played by Salma Hayek, has switched allegiance and wants to prevent the destruction of the Earth, frankly, the strongest argument is that it was people of the Earth who reversed the Thanos snap that destroyed half the universe. And weirdly, I don't feel that argument gets fleshed out enough. I feel like the clear, compelling point would be if the emergence had happened 4 or 5 years in advance, the Avengers' reversal of the blip wouldn't have happened, and you would just be stuck with the loss of half the life in the universe, whatever that is, billions or trillions of lives, and would probably prevent a large number of other Celestials from being born if everything stays on track. And so weirdly, that actually wound up sort of being thrown away instead of being fleshed out like I feel it should have been, even though that's contrary to my grief all the other times that there are too many references to it. In this particular case, for this cosmic story, I feel that actually should be deeply addressed. And they kind of couldn't pick either path on that, and it's at the same time underdeveloped. And also, in other places, I'm also sick of hearing it. Bonus problem appendix. I'm kind of a little sick of having new characters being brought in as advertising ploys at the end of the movies. So with the Eternals, in the conclusion and the end title scene, there are no fewer than 3 new characters from the comic books brought in for the first time, basically to promote future projects. And at this point, it kind of feels to me predictable. We always end now with an advertisement for upcoming properties like that. At this point, I'm kind of longing for the early days when a particular character was developed in isolation in a standalone solo movie, got to see their whole personality and their story, and then later on connected to the larger MCU in a later movie. I enjoyed that a lot, and I kind of wish I could keep seeing that so every single movie and every single show doesn't end with so many unresolved plot threads. So that's what I'm thinking about Marvel's The Eternals the day after I saw it. Maybe you see some solutions to these problems that I'm not finding right now. Please leave a comment so I can know what it is. And while you're there, if you like this video, like and subscribe to the Wandering DMs channel. We have a bunch of other great content, like actual play sessions of the Marvel Superheroes role-playing game. We got to interview the creator of the Marvel Superheroes RPG, Mr. Jeff Grubb. And we have a weekly D&D and role-playing talk show every Sunday afternoon with live viewer chat. So hope to see you then.